Hi everyone, welcome back. It's Lucy, and today I'm going to be talking to you all about symptoms of IBD that are outside of the gut. These are sometimes referred to as extraintestinal manifestations, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to be saying symptoms outside of the gut. I've done several patient panels over the years where I've talked about my experiences with IBD and answered questions, and one thing that I get the most questions about and that interests the most people is my journey in being diagnosed and what my symptoms were like that did not include my colon. I was officially diagnosed with indeterminate colitis at the age of 15, but I started experiencing symptoms related to IBD several years before that. So throughout the entire time that I was in middle school, I was experiencing IBD symptoms. I just didn't know that it was IBD yet. Oftentimes, there is a delay in IBD diagnosis, and so it's important to know what kind of symptoms are out there that exist that don't necessarily affect the colon directly, but are due to IBD. If I had known that these various symptoms that I had had for years prior to my diagnosis were related to IBD, I may have been able to connect the dots a little bit sooner and get treatment sooner rather than later. The first thing that I'm going to be talking about is called Erythmnidosum. I'm going to put that word up on the screen so that y'all can know what I'm talking about. I first started experiencing that when I was 12 years old and experienced it on and off throughout my teenage years up until adulthood. I will first read to you the definition of erythemnidosum, and then I'll delve into my own personal experiences with this condition. So the definition is an inflammatory condition characterized by inflammation of the fat cells under the skin, resulting in tender, red nodules or lumps that are usually seen on both shins. So I started being impacted by erythemnidosum when I was 12, and that lasted on and off until I was about 15. And then after that, I would only really be affected by it when I was having an IBD flare-up. But between the ages of 12 and 15, I was pretty continuously experiencing the effects of erythemnidosum. As the definition states, this is mostly on your shins. For me, I also had it down my calves and on the rest of my legs as well, and I still have scars to this day from erythemnidosum, some of which I covered up with tattoos. Because there are lumps of fat cells growing at a pretty fast rate under your skin, it's really tender and really sore. So it was really painful for me growing up having to deal with this, and sometimes I would pick at them and they would become almost open wounds. And this made me really self-conscious, but also really physically uncomfortable as well. So it was a really challenging thing to deal with as a young adult. Whenever I would see doctors or dermatologists about this condition, I was told that maybe I was using the wrong kind of razor or the wrong kind of shaving cream. So I tried using electric razors. I tried taking bleach baths, where I would take a bath and put a cup and a half of bleach in it and soak in it. I tried taking oatmeal baths. I tried taking Epsom salt baths. I tried everything that I was told to get rid of this condition, but I didn't know that it was an inflammatory condition caused by my overall immune system, not something that I was doing to my skin. I later learned as an adult that a lot of people that have IBD experience erythemnidosum when they are young, and had I known that, it would have made my self-confidence a lot better, and it would have kind of clued us in as to what was going on with my body overall, and that it was not necessarily just a dermatological issue. The second thing that I experienced is a little bit more along the lines of intestinal symptoms, but I didn't have any bleeding in my stool, and I didn't have any mucus in my stool either. And so I didn't necessarily have the telltale signs of IBD at first, but I did have a lot of nausea and vomiting and stomach cramps for the years leading up to my diagnosis of IBD. It became kind of a running joke in my friend group in middle school that I always had food poisoning, and it was a mystery to me, but kind of entertaining to my social circle, because I was always absent for school for being sick. My friends and I were always so baffled as to why I was constantly getting food poisoning, because I ate the same things as my family and everybody else. No one else was getting sick. But I would constantly have bouts of vomiting and nausea and would frequently have to miss school all throughout middle school. Even right up until I was diagnosed with IBD and I had been seen about these conditions, I was told that I had the stomach flu or some kind of bug that was just constantly making me stomach sick. Even the doctors that I would go to specifically see for this issue didn't really put the pieces together that I had IBD. And so I was just kind of under the illusion for several years that I just perpetually had food poisoning. I later learned that the nausea and vomiting were most likely due to my IBD. Next thing on my list of symptoms I experienced as a child that I didn't know were related to IBD is mouth ulcers. As an adult, it makes so much sense to me that I would have had mouth ulcers as a child because having Crohn's disease, you can be affected in your esophagus, all the way down to your rectum, including your mouth, your stomach, everything in between. But as a child, I didn't know that I had IBD, and so I didn't know that the ulcers in my mouth were related to anything bigger. When I first started experiencing mouth ulcers to an alarming degree, I had braces. And so it was very easy for doctors and the people around me to dismiss my ulcers as caused by braces. I also spent several years completely avoiding acidic foods like strawberries and pineapples, just in case they could have been the culprit. No matter how mild I kept my diet or how much wax I globbed on my braces, I still had ulcers. And lo and behold, when I began treatment for my IBD once I was diagnosed at the age of 15, my ulcers in my mouth disappeared and I never really had them again. Middle school was a rough time. And the last symptom that I'm going to be talking about that I started experiencing quite a while before I was diagnosed with IBD is fatigue. Bear in mind that I have several comorbidities, including fibromyalgia, and so I have lots of conditions that make me fatigued. So it's not necessarily just IBD that is causing the fatigue, but it does cause fatigue in myself and other people that have IBD. When I was younger, doing things like sports, exercise, PE, wore me out way quicker and way easier than it did to other people, and I never knew why. I thought I was just bad at sports, which is true, but it didn't explain why I was so incredibly fatigued all the time. I remember having to run the mile in middle school and being absolutely exhausted. I would cry. I would be so upset because I would get an F almost every time because no matter how hard I tried, I just could not run as fast as the other people and with the same stamina as the other people. Even when it came to things that didn't have to do with exercise, like walking around the mall with friends, I often had to stop and sit down, which was not common for somebody who was 13 or 14 years old. We'd be walking around Forever 21, having the time of our lives, and I'd have to sit down and take a little bit of a breather, which is not common for somebody at that age, but I just didn't fully understand what this meant, and the doctors didn't really put the pieces together until a few years later. So there you have it. There are all of these symptoms that I experienced as a child and a teenager leading up to my diagnosis of IBD that we didn't really know were IBD related until after my diagnosis and years of experience. So I hope this video helped you. I hope that in the future diagnostic processes can become faster and more accurate so that other children in the future don't have to deal with the same kind of delayed processes that I had to go through, and that hopefully it can become more streamlined to know that all of these different seemingly unrelated symptoms can all be tied to the same underlying disease. Thank you all for tuning in and have a happy November.